Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Newsviews. I'm Judy Sue. A week ago today, 26 people were shot to death at a Texas church by a man who should not have been able to legally buy a gun because of a conviction for domestic violence. As Americans mourn this latest mass shooting, people continue to ask once again, what can be done to prevent such violence? And much of the discussion focused on gun laws, mental health care, and domestic violence. We're going to get started this morning with gun laws, not the debate about what they should or should not be, but just the facts on where our current gun laws stand. Joining me this morning is Professor Cody Jacobs from the Chicago-Kent College of Law. Nice to have you here. Good morning to you. So I guess I want to clarify, first of all, about this FBI database. We know now in this Texas case that something fell through. There was a breakdown in the process. His domestic violence record was not properly reported to the database. Would that have flagged him in that background search process?
Yes, it would have. If someone's convicted of a domestic violence offense, then they're generally prohibited from owning a gun. And so if the background check had been done and that conviction had been in the FBI system, he would not have been allowed to purchase a weapon.
Walk us through a little bit the background check process. And plus, first of all, is that universal across the country?
Yes, so that's a federal law that requires background checks. Now, we don't have universal background checks because we only have background checks at federally licensed firearms dealers. And so when people talk about, closing the, universal background checks and closing the private sale loophole, they mean that there are some dealers that are not federally licensed firearms dealers, like people who sort of sell some guns on the side or something like that. And those weapons can be transferred without a background check unless there's a state law that requires it.
Okay, so when you are going through this FBI background check, what are they looking for? What is the process supposed to look like?
So they're looking at a few different criminal justice databases that the FBI maintains. And those databases contain convictions that people get, times that they're arrested, things like that get entered into this national database, and they check it to make sure that the person is not in a category of people who is prohibited from owning a gun. So this includes people who have domestic violence convictions. It also includes people who are convicted of felonies, things of that nature, people who are convicted of those kind of crimes aren't allowed to own a gun under federal law. And so the way the system is supposed to work is that those people will try to buy a gun, but then the background check will flag them as not eligible to purchase a gun.
Okay, I want to talk about gun laws here in Chicago and the state of Illinois. We consistently hear in the news, and many of the statements coming from the current Trump administration, that Chicago has some of the toughest gun laws in the country, yet we continue to see violence rates go up. Is that true? Do we have the strictest gun laws in the country?
No, I mean, that's at best misleading on both fronts, actually. I mean, for one thing, it's often repeated that Chicago's the most dangerous city in the country, and that's just not true in terms of gun violence. Cities like St. Louis, New Orleans, Detroit all have higher rates of firearms-related homicides than Chicago does. Now, that's not to say Chicago doesn't have a problem with gun violence. It does, but people need to understand it in context that on a per capita basis, Chicago's far from the most dangerous city. Now, as far as our gun laws are concerned, Chicago's gun laws are also not the strictest in the country by any means. In fact, Chicago's gun laws have gotten weaker over the last 5 years. Chicago, for example, used to require firearm owners to register their guns, and that law was repealed by a state law that was passed in 2013. So that's just one example, but there's many places that have stricter gun laws than Chicago, including Los Angeles and New York, which I would add, by the way, both have lower rates of gun-related homicides than Chicago.
I want to ask you about one other question. There was a lot of debate recently about when it comes to Social Security and people who claim a disability based on mental illness, maybe that should be entered into the database so that they can't purchase a weapon. Where do we stand with that? Yeah,
so late in the Obama administration, they promulgated a regulation that would have required the Social Security Administration to report people who claim disability benefits because of certain mental conditions into the FBI database that I mentioned earlier. And that regulation, though, was controversial with gun advocates and some civil liberties advocates who said that It was stigmatizing people with mental illness, or even making people reluctant to come forward who had mental illnesses. And so the Republicans in Congress repealed the regulation earlier this year.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in this morning and clarifying some of these subjects for us. Very important for all of us to know. Dr. Jacobs, thank you for your time. And when we come back here, we'll talk with two experts about mental health care. That's right after a short break.